Doctor Who Season by Season. Season 8 Review. Season 8 of Doctor Who was broadcast in 1971. It was the second season to star Jon Pertwee as the third Doctor, the second to be produced and script edited by Barry Letts and Terrance Dicks, and the second to star Nicholas Courtney in a regular capacity as the much-loved Brigadier Alistair Gordon Lethbridge-Stewart. However, the season is considerably different in a number of ways from its predecessor. Season 7 had largely been set up by former producer Derek Sherwin, and Season 8 was the first upon which Barry Letts could really impose his own mark. These changes included no less than 4 new regular characters and a change in tone from the very adult and gritty Season 7 to a more colourful, fun and family-friendly model. Some could even, not unreasonably argue, that this season and the rest of the Pertwee era is rather dumbed down in comparison to the previous season, a change that can be particularly apparent if watching the series in order, and opinions vary about the effectiveness of this. All 4 of the new regular characters appear in the first story of the season, Terror of the Autons, written by Robert Holmes as a sequel to the Season 7 opener, also written by Holmes, the classic spearhead from space. John Levine, who had appeared in a couple of stories previously as Sergeant Benton, was now a fully fledged series regular, but 3 completely new characters arrive in Terror. The first is the official new companion, Jo Grant, played by Katie Manning, with Caroline Johns Liz Shuriton out off-screen between seasons. Jo is as thick as a brick but is very cute and charming, and certainly incredibly brave, often to the point of almost seeming suicidally so. Then there is a new UNET character in the form of Captain Mike Yates, played by Richard Franklin. And finally there is the introduction of the Master for the very first time, played in his original incarnation by Roger Delgado, and who appears in every single story of this season. I have to be honest, I'm not a massive fan of the original Master. He's not terrible or anything, but he was very much overused in the era, and in a typical display of contrariness that will no doubt get me a fatwa, I always rather preferred Anthony Ainley's fruitier 80s version. Terror of the Autons is a fun debut, though my opinion of it tends to change with almost every viewing. The last but one time I watched it I thought it was terrible, cheap, garish, irritating and dumb, and yet on my most recent viewing I had a great time with it. I guess you have to be in the right mood, and as previously noted, I think it helps watched on its own rather than in the context of a marathon. The next story is The Mind of Evil, which represents something of a stylistic throwback to Season 7. It's not quite as gritty or adult, but it's close, and it's a very entertaining story with some nice twists and plenty of action. The Master is cool as a mafia don figure, smoking cigars and riding around in limousines, and Jo seems to have matured a great already since Terror, coming across as a competent agent and even breaking up a prison riot single-handed in one example of her sometimes holy shit insane moments of bravery. Bizarrely, the character regresses to infantile levels in the next story, The Claws of Axos, which is one of the worst of the season if not the era as a whole. It's cheap and garish but also deeply stupid and witless, and the guest characters are annoying as fuck. Jo is also depicted as utterly useless and shrieking in this story, which seems like a regression not only from Mind but even from Terror. This is an awful story, and by this point the inclusion of the Master in every story is starting to look forced and be rather irritating. The next story is Colony in Space, which is one of the better stories of the season and one of the most underrated of the era. The TARDIS suddenly starts working again and spirits the Doctor and Jo off to an alien world where a group of colonists are having difficulty sustaining themselves and dealing with the natives, only for their situation to worsen with the arrival of IMC, an intergalactic mining corporation who want the planet for themselves and will go to any lengths to get it. I seem to be in something of a minority with this one. What a shocker, lads. But I really rather like this story, and it has a much more adult tone to it than most of the season. There are some nice performances from the guest characters, particularly Maurice Perry as the icy Captain Dent and Bernard Kay as Caldwell, one of the miners who finds it increasingly difficult to justify or live with the behavior of his fellows. Dent is a great villain precisely because he's not a raving loony or out-and-out evil. He doesn't have anything against the colonists per se, he just doesn't give a shit. If they'd just fuck off and leave him the planet, he'd have no issue with that. But if they won't, he will take it any way he can. Unlike many fans it seems, I find this story pretty interesting, believable and compelling, and am then disappointed and rolling my eyes when the fucking master turns up a fucking gain over halfway through the story, at which point the far more interesting colonists versus IMC plot takes a backseat to the master running around trying to take over the universe again. Oh, just fuck off already. This development doesn't ruin the story entirely, and it is still one of the best stories of the season, but it is rather annoying, to put it mildly. The final story of the season is The Demons. The Demons is an extremely popular story, once regarded as not just one of, if not their, best Pertwee story but one of the show's all-time great classics. I'm going to be Mr. Unpopular again, because I'm afraid I think The Demons is not just overrated but pretty fucking terrible. It's desperately trying to be some sort of scary gothic horror, but at this point the show just doesn't have the stones to really do it, so it ends up all coming across as rather lukewarm. The overexposure of the master is now at "you've got to be fucking kidding me" levels, and the music is really irritating as well. Add to that the stupid ending, which despite being another example of Joe's suicidal bravery, just doesn't make much fucking sense. I get that the cast loved making this story on location, and many in fandom's early days basically brainwashed everyone else with the "this is a classic" routine, but it really isn't. In my opinion it is the worst story of the season next to The Claws of Axos. Sorry, whinge if you want to. Season 8 as a whole is a big come down from the gloriousness that was Season 7, but is still a moderately entertaining season on the whole. Even if I'm not really a massive fan of the Let's style, I give Season 8 a B-.